Just Stop Oil have announced that they are, quote, hanging up the high vis. After 3 years of disruptive protests that saw Van Gogh's sunflowers covered in soup and Stonehenge sprayed with orange powder, the group is retiring from direct action. Many of those protests were met with harsh policing, and dozens of climate activists have been jailed for their involvement. This is from JSO. Just Stop Oil's initial demand to end new oil and gas is now government policy, making us one of the most successful civil resistance campaigns in recent history. We've kept over 4.4 billion barrels of oil in the ground, and the courts have ruled new oil and gas licenses are unlawful. Just Stop Oil will continue to tell the truth in the courts, speak out for our political prisoners, and call out the UK's oppressive anti-protest laws. So, is this really the end of Just Stop Oil? Earlier today, I put that question to Just Stop Oil spokesperson James Skeet.
Just Stop Oil was conceived with a single, simple, winnable demand, which was no new oil and gas licenses. And really what we've seen the last few years is we've dragged a fairly unsexy topic of new oil and gas licenses from the arse end of the business pages, onto the front pages, day after day, week after week, year after year. And really what that's done is sort of open up this space in the political discourse, which has kind of been occupied by sort of potentially more moderate factions of the environmental movement and indeed politicians. And we've seen that demand now actually become government policy. So from our perspective, we always said we would wrap up the campaign once we were given what we want. And so it's on to the next thing.
So obviously you mentioned there that one of the reasons why you're stopping is because there's been a cessation of licensing for all new oil, gas and coal projects. Like, that's a political victory for yourselves. Obviously, the main goal of your campaign has been met by the new administration. Now, obviously, Keir Starmer would never admit that civil disobedience could play a role in fomenting policy change. So as a political movement outside of mainstream politics, how do you measure success?
To put it bluntly, as a species, we're kind of effed up the A, and not in the fun way. The British insurance industry at the moment is talking about 4 billion dead in the coming decades, in a not unreasonable scenario of 3 degrees of warming. And for those of you who think that money's the only metric of consequence, they're also talking about 50% loss of GDP, which stands to reason if half the world's population are going to be annihilated. And if we look at that in sort of the wider context, where we have we have a political and media establishment that are fundamentally incapable of really dealing with any of these problems, and we have an awful lot of what we're seeing is driving a lot of disquiet, and people are sort of being swept up by sort of dishonest far right actors that are kind of like promising them all sorts of fake solutions. So I mean, obviously we're operating in a very tricky political paradigm, and we're sort of not ignorant to that fact. But I mean, as a movement, we see that it's really important that we kind of consolidate our victories, like we were conceived with a single winnable demand, so we could prove the efficacy of these sorts of tactics, which we have done so. And really, how we sort of approach from here is the next question, really. And I think from our point of view, strategically, we want a sort of synergy between a revolution in the democratic space paired with a street movement. So we're going to be working on the next iteration, the next sort of mass participatory street movement, and we're also going to be looking at updating our democracy. So I'd encourage in some of your listeners to head to houseofthepeople.uk and get involved with updating our democracy.
Dozens of JSO activists have been jailed over the last 3 years, with some receiving the longest sentences ever handed down for non-violent civil disobedience in the UK. Do you think this harsh reaction from the state will have a lasting impact on the climate movement?
Our position really is that whatever the state can throw at us is kind of nothing in comparison to the ongoing climate collapse that we're seeing, right? I think that. I mean, that ultimately, what we sort of attempt to do in this sort of scenario is it's a kind of political and moral jujitsu where you're sort of trying to push your opponent into an overreach, which I think that we've seen. So I mean, I don't think any the full ramifications of what we've been engaged in the last few years has fully played out, but I'm fairly confident that as the situation escalates, that we will see, we will see more, more civil disobedience and indeed more civil unrest.
There's a final day of action planned in Parliament Square on Saturday. What can you tell us about it?
Yes, so we'll be out on the streets for one final protest at from St James's Park. I would encourage all of your viewers to come down and join in the celebration about what we've achieved the last 3 years, and and also really to join us and get involved with developing what comes next. So I mean, folks can do that either by signing up at justaboard.org, or yeah, head to houseofthepeople.uk, and get involved with our democracy project as well.
So, this House of the People democracy project that you are teasing to us today, what kind of aims is this new movement looking to put forward? Or can you give us a rough idea of what kind of plans you're looking to take with this particular project?
So sure, yeah, the House of the People is essentially a sortition based alternative to the House of Lords. This is where people are selected at random in much the same way as a jury. And essentially, the idea is, and it's a very old idea that goes back centuries. Essentially, the idea is that ordinary people can make better decisions than careerist politicians. So that's one strand of our strategy. We feel that paired with a street movement is really kind of the way to go about things in terms of having this sort of pincer movement. So we're not going to be giving up civil disobedience either, but certainly, the problems that we're sort of facing as a culture right now, with what I've outlined, it extends far beyond the boundaries of a simple campaign that's focused at new oil and gas licenses. So that's the rationale.
That was James Skeet from Just Stop Oil speaking to me earlier today. And if you'd like to learn more about this topic, Novara Media has a brand new podcast.